Besides voting on a president and lots of other races and initiatives, there's something else voters in towns across the state are deciding this November: tax hikes and bond measures. The cost of government just keeps going up. Why is that? Also, the OC Fair made money this year. A lot of other fairs didn't. Should government even be in this business? And is anti-Muslim bigotry afoot in Newport Beach? Well, joining me to discuss all of these stories, lawyer and OC Fair board member Ashleigh Aitken, former executive director of the Lincoln Club of Orange County, Clare Venegas, and vice president of communications at the California Policy Center, Will Swaim. Coming right up on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University, with its Center for Science and Technology, under construction in Orange, California, is a proud sponsor of Inside OC.
I guess a kid could read it. It's really descriptive in the narrative. It's just a fascinating thing.
Not the Circus of Dr. Lau.
No.
Okay. Hi, I'm Reiff. Welcome to Inside OC, and I'm talking local issues and books and stuff like that with Ashleigh Aitken, Clare Venegas, and Will Swaim. Welcome all for being here.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little politics, Will. As you look at the ballot, there's state issues, tax hike proposals, bond issues. Local level, lots of bond and tax measures. What's going on?
Well, what we're seeing, I think, is probably the pent-up demand for more dollars, primarily for public employees, of course. That's in public safety, by and large. So in a lot of North Orange County cities, in Stanton in 2014, we had a sales tax increase, the first 1% sales tax in Orange County. And now it's Westminster, Fountain Valley, La Habra are all looking for 1% sales tax hikes as well. It would be local sales tax. So they'll all have higher sales taxes than all the other, mostly South County cities. And it's being pushed by just the constant ratcheting up of public safety. That's firefighters, cops, or sheriffs.
So it's being pitched to the voters that this is for public safety.
That's correct.
And I would think voters think, oh, we'll have more cops, we'll have more firefighters,
that's right.
But that's
exactly how it's pitched, and it's not entirely correct. I mean, if you go to Stanton, for example, 2014, they pitched it as, if we don't get this, your grandmother's going to die from, a gang home invasion while her house is on fire if we don't pass this sales tax increase. In the meantime, the city was spending $24 million to build a park it said was going to cost $6 million. So there's a lot of other stuff pressing this, but by and large it is just the year in, year out cost of living increases, they call them cost of living increases, for public safety.
Yeah, when you look at it, I mean, really, you think about a household budget, right? You have a fixed amount of income that's coming in, and I think what local governments are seeing are the fact that you've got a fixed amount of revenue coming to a city. And more of that budget is being eaten up by employee costs, whether it's rising pensions, more generous pay packages. I mean, that's just the reality of what these cities are facing. So you've got cities, even small cities like Stanton. Who knew there was even enough business to tax in Stanton, but there is. And they went up to literally the highest level of sales tax in Orange County just to fund public employee pensions.
Ashleigh, we hear about these things. I see everybody's kind of aware of it now. Everybody knows that the public employee benefits and the costs, the retirement costs, we see articles about the $100,000 club and how it keeps growing. More and more people, many of them just, rank and file officers who retire and are retiring late 50s, making $100,000 a year in retirement. It seems unsustainable, but the courts in California basically said, you've got to pay it. Is there any way out of this, or do you think this is an overblown problem?
Well, I don't think there should be any way out of it. I mean, you're talking about public servants that instead of, as an accountant, go to Deloitte & Touche, they decide to go into public service and work for the county. I'm a former prosecutor. I left a very lucrative position to then go and spend several years serving my country for, nickels on the dollar of what I was making in the private sector. And this is just the same pension busters that try to pit private sector employees against middle income public employees. And I think it's a really terrible thing. We have to have, we want to protect people into retirement, and people have the right to retire with dignity. What never gets discussed, and what pension busters always, they find these $100,000 club and they act like Orange County is filled with them. That's just not true. I believe on that list that came out, there was one person that was the former city manager for Santa Ana that was on that list. Most people on these pensions are making less than $50,000 a year.
No, that's not true. That's not true.
And
that's only true if you take people who work part-time or only for a few years. What's in fact true is the average firefighter can retire at 50 after 30 years, making $250,000. You would have to have $12 million in assets, throwing off interest of about 10% to make anything approaching what these guys can make. Plus, lifetime health care benefits. Firefighters live longer than the average Californian. They live to 84, probably because they can retire early, lift weights, get great health care, and make $250,000. These are people with second and even third homes. They have side businesses while they work. Right. This is not the hard press. We're not talking about people who are working as an administrator or something like that for $40,000 or $50,000 a year. We really are talking about the elite. And these aren't employee unions, or we're not pension busters. These are people who are lobbying associations who will back Republicans or Democrats as long as they sign off on higher income and benefits.
But they already had the pension reform several years ago. So if there's a perceived flaw in the system, then a lot of those flaws for new hires have already been fixed. But what's not being discussed, you talk about CalPERS. CalPERS is statewide less than 3% of the California budget. So it is not that the California budget and the county budgets are being taken over by public servants. It's less than 3%.
Yeah, I think
what you're really going after, though, are teachers that don't get paid Social Security, teachers that make, on average, less than $3,000 a month. You're talking about firefighters, police officers. I mean, do they make a lot of money? Yes. Am I going to go into a burning building? No. So at some point, they should be rewarded for that. I just think
when you see in this $100,000 pension club, when you see it grow in the year 2000 from, I think, 1,800 state employees that made $100,000 a year up to 21,000 in 10 years, 21,000 employees getting well over $100,000 a year every year for the rest of their lives, retiring early, like you said. I think it's obviously egregious, I think, and that's where you're saying cities get squeezed.
Even if we could afford it, even if it were reasonable, let's say, to have somebody retire with $250,000 a year, the fact is that unless taxes go higher in California, we can't afford it. I think that's the bottom line. It'd be nice to give everybody a Ferrari in retirement. We can't afford that. So what can we afford? And again, you bring in teachers. We can talk about teachers all day if you'd like, but the fact is that the public safety component of local budgets that we've been talking about here in North Orange County, it's the public safety guys who comprise 70 and 75% of the local budget, and perhaps ought to. But the fact is there are better ways to do this than the lobbying associations of police and firefighters would have you believe.
And I think the reality is that once that pie starts to grow to fund these rising employee costs, what's going to get squeezed? I mean, you're going to see roads fail. You're going to see less money to spend on park improvements. I mean, that's just the reality of city budgets.
Do you think it's a problem, Ashleigh? I mean, you gave a very articulate defense of public employees and their pensions, but is it sustainable? Is it because they do make more now. Even it used to be you get a nice defined benefit as a public employee because you're not making as much as you would in the private sector. Now when they do the comparisons, public employees actually make more than people in the private sector. And is that sustainable?
I think it's going to have to be, because if you don't let people retire with dignity and you don't find a way for these people to retire and have the ability to pay for these costs, they're going to then end up, if you don't pay them well, they're going to end up using other types of community resources. And
how do you define dignity? What's retirement?
I know how you, but Ashleigh defines it as a top hat and a monocle. I would define it as actually being able merely, to survive. We pay people to go to war a lot less than we pay cops and firefighters. They go to war. They handle lethal weaponry and life-saving technologies, and we pay them $1 on $100. We pay them a small percentage of what we pay cops and firefighters. And most firefighters aren't going into burning buildings. We're sending, 6, 8, 9 firefighters out because grandmother got dizzy. It's mostly now medical calls, but the firefighting lobby has insisted that everybody has to roll whenever somebody gets dizzy. Don't want to disparage the great and heroic work, but again, I would ask you, are there more sustainable ways of doing this? The answer is yes, from my perspective.
And I think that could be true, but then you need to look at the budget as a whole instead of always having the same argument, which is we have to go after public employees. They have inflated pensions and they don't deserve all of this money that they're going.
Again, it's back to the pie example. I mean, if you've got costs that are rising and they're comprising a greater amount of that pie, what else is getting squeezed out? And I think that's a fair question for taxpayers to ask, because they're footing the bill ultimately. Yeah, they can retire with dignity and more benefits.
Yeah, Anaheim went through the same thing, where I would say my argument to that is don't go after people that are public employees, don't go after pensions. Why don't you talk to the people on the dais of Anaheim and ask, why are you giving Disneyland and all these corporations tax breaks when you're basically now trying to take all the benefits away from your firefighters?
I'm glad you brought that up, because
there's
Anaheim,
a pie, and it just needs to be reallocated, and we need to stop. We need to start treating firefighters and cops and police and public administrators as well as we treat corporations like Disneyland.
Wow. Start treating them as well as we treat corporations. In fact, in Anaheim, what happened was Disneyland cut a deal with the Anaheim City Council and the public employee unions to give all the public employee unions raises in exchange for not protesting Disney subsidies. So it was totally a crony capitalist deal. We had the public employee unions, government officials, and Disneyland working together to make sure everybody got their place at the trough. Who got screwed? The taxpayers. Totally got. And this is about poor people. This is about social justice. This is about who can afford to live in California now. What we're finding is that more and more people have to vote by leaving the state. Firefighters don't stay here after they retire. They go to their second home in Idaho.
Well, there is probably much lower sales tax, if not
absolutely.
or income tax.
Absolutely.
So what's your guess as to how most of these tax issues are going to come out? Will the voters say, hey, like it or not, we've got to approve it?
Well, right now, what Ashleigh's got going for her and what the firefighters and the police have going for their associations is people have a sense that these guys really put their lives in the risk. What's astonishing to most people is to find out that firefighters make far more than police officers in exchange for work which is arguably not quite as dangerous, given the percentage of calls that firefighters go on that might actually be really dangerous, versus police who are on the line every single hour. Ultimately, I think there's going to be a total failure of the infrastructure. And once we go into bankruptcy, a lot of cities will just say to the firefighters, come on down and eat City Hall, to the police, come on down and take over the park, because we've got no other assets. We're seeing the failure already. In Costa Mesa, for example, back in 2010, the unions kept saying, the Orange County Employees Association, Jennifer Muir and Nick Berardino kept saying, there are other ways to cut the budget. And when it came down to it, it was cut all the programs that are meaningful to the poorest people in Costa Mesa. It was things like asphalting alleyways. It was supporting parks. It was fertilizing and watering the grass at a park. Cut that out so we can continue to fund unfunded liability.
I mean, I think that the taxpayers, unfortunately, hear just that line that, it's about public safety, it's about keeping our neighborhoods more safe, and there is not much transparency when it comes to what are these tax increases really going to fund. Even with bond measures, I mean, you've got a $2 billion bond measure being proposed in Capital Unified. Can anybody tell me what needs to be done beyond, a $2 billion bond? I mean, you really have to think about, what are they really selling? And I think a lot of people are skeptical. I just don't think there's enough transparency, and that's the work that the folks at Cal Policy Center are working to do with their Transparent California website.
Yeah, but if you're going to have, we don't pay taxes at the rate of any other first world country. I think people that live in France, live in London, would love to
But we pay the highest in the country, in our country.
Well, yeah, but you look where you get to live.
Yeah.
So we're paying a tax for the weather.
No, you're paying a tax because yes, the property values here are more expensive, but that doesn't necessarily translate because of Prop 13 and other things and money back to the cities. So my argument is always, I understand people don't want to pay taxes and people don't want to vote against their own economic interest by paying for a tax, but then you have things like bond measures because the schools don't have any money. So you're either going to pay for it up front or you're going to pay for it later in a bond measure.
Those aren't our only choices. Our only choices aren't that we either pay some tax or pay no tax. Nobody's proposing no tax.
Oh, I think there's a lot of people that would love to have
I'm
no
not
tax.
one. I'm not one of them, and I wouldn't defend them. I would say they're crazy and they can go live in Somalia or something. Where you just pay a tax to the local warlord, which is beginning to be how it feels here, I must say, that we pay taxes to Republicans and Democrats who are the party of government working for large corporations and public employee unions. That's what we work for. Our property taxes here, in many cases, for the middle class, exceed the mortgage payments of people in almost every other state in the union.
Right. Yeah.
There's a problem. If people can't afford to live in this state, they are going to leave. If the infrastructure fails, companies will leave. we are on the edge of this kind of collapse. And it's not just public employee compensation, it's also just waste, just profligate waste.
Well, thank you for this spirited exchange. I know we could do the entire show on this, but we do have some other things. And Ashleigh, you're defending here, so now let's defend the Orange County Fair. The fair had another, I think by any fair measure, a successful season. It made money, which was noted in an editorial in the Orange County Register, which also noted, however, that Los Angeles's fair lost almost $2 million, and most fairs do lose money, most of these county fairs. So they raised the question, should county governments even be in the business of running fairs? So as a member of the Fair Board, what do you think?
Well, I want to be really clear that the county does not run the fair. We are a state agency, and that is state land. So the county doesn't have any.
So you run but it's called a county fair, right?
If you want to ask about whether should the state government then be involved in the fairgrounds, you know, we're a very different model than LA. If you remember, I got involved with the Fair Board because we were defending pro bono a lawsuit when the former Fair Board tried to form a nonprofit and sell themselves 250 acres in the middle of Orange County, which is egregious, and we were able to stop it. But what the model they wanted to do is the same way that LA got in trouble, and that LA is technically a nonprofit. So there's no, we were talking about transparency, government oversight. There's none of that in these nonprofit models. Now, what the Orange County Fair has been lucky to do is we do have a very successful fair, same as San Diego. And because we're part of the state agency, we are able to fund and send some of our revenue up to smaller county fairs so that they can survive. They don't have the population. We have millions of people in this county, and we sell a good product, and that's why people come. San Diego, a very urban area. You have places like Turlock and Tulare that I think they do have, there's smaller populations, rural populations, but do they not get a county fair because they don't have the wound?
I hate to sound like a hard heart, but no, they don't get a county fair. Why don't they just drive a little ways to the bigger county fair, wherever it may be?
Well, the same reason, then why should they have libraries, parks, any of these things that don't make money?
On the pecking order of things, all right, libraries, parks, yes, county fair, you know.
The county fair and why it's so important is, one, it's the one time I feel like in Orange County that you are bringing together a whole bunch of people that come from different cities, different economic backgrounds, and they are all going into the promenade, and they are all of their displays, their art displays. There's people that are woodworking. Everyone in Orange County that has all these talents that we didn't know about. Same about the 4-H. I'm very involved in the 4-H and with the future farmers. Agriculture is what this county was founded on. And if we don't have the fair where these kids from the FFA get to come and show their animals at the junior livestock auction, if they don't get to go and get exposed to this, where else are they going to do it?
Well, I think if it's, and again, I'd like Rick, I don't mean to sound like a hard case, but if it's such a great idea, why isn't it just privately funded? Why don't people just flock to this thing if it's a great idea, why doesn't some company just go and do it?
Well, and the reason that the difference between the county fair and Disneyland is that ours costs $7 to get into, which makes it a lot more accessible as opposed to having to pay over $100 per person to get into Disneyland. Now, we just made a decision in the Orange County Fair Board for the last couple of years not to raise admission prices because we want it to be accessible for people to have exposure to the Centennial Farm, to be able to go into and have experiences with the livestock. And the other big project that we're doing now is our veterans exhibit. I mean, we can talk all day about how this county doesn't do anything for veterans. And you made the comment about how veterans get treated. Well, is it necessarily the job of the Orange County Fair Board to build this Heroes Hall and save one of the original buildings from when it was the Santa Ana Air Base as a gift to future generations about what that property was? I believe it is. I believe that is something that has value, although it might not, line your pockets.
Well, as government, and we just talked about this in the last segment. I mean, as government and including the state government, as they continue to expand, is there more costs going to fund things like, public employee pensions and all of that? I mean, is there going to be room in the state budget to continue to have a subsidized, fun fair for everyone to go to? I don't know. Probably not. That might be one thing that does need to get cut in the state budget. We just,
well, I will say,
I don't want to live in this world where there's no fairs and there's no firemen.
There's plenty to do.
There are fairs. They just don't charge people who don't go. So the people who do want to go can have a lower admission price, I guess,
Yeah,
or so they can go see the brand new blender or the world's largest horse or
it's a
Milky
wonderful
Way
thing.
bar dipped
Fairs
in
are
fried
great.
goo. Yeah.
But when we talk about priorities in government funding, I would put it lower on the
Well,
list.
that's why I want to bring us this point. We do make a lot of money.
Yes, and as long as,
Let's
as
keep
long
it
as-
here.
I would say in
how much
general.
was it this year roughly? How much?
We had, I don't have the exact numbers because we are going to get presented them too, but I know they said we did over last year, we had about a 3 or 4% increase, but the final numbers haven't
Okay.
been
And
presented.
as long as you're on the fair board, it's making money. I'm not going to get too bent out of shape over it.
You're
Okay.
not taking away
All
my
right.
corn dogs, Rick.
Right.
Another issue. Fred or Farouk? Is he Fred Ameri or Farouk Ameri? He is a candidate for Newport Beach Council, a well-known engineer, a structural, I believe, a structural engineer, and is running now, first time. He's running for public office, respected citizen, and he's gone by Fred for years and years and years. He's originally from Iran, and so someone, let's say, connected to his opponent filed a complaint with the Board of Registrars saying that he needs to use his name Farouk on the ballot instead of Fred.
Why do you suppose they were doing that?
Yes, why do you suppose he did that? By the way, the judge said no, he can use Fred. Yes, Will, why do you suppose they did that?
Well, this is kind of a modest tragedy, and I'll say that it's a modest tragedy because I think in the end Fred got his way. But the tragedy is that some group of people apparently thought, I'm guessing, that using his birth name would make him seem more, let's say, exotic or perhaps even dangerous because it's a Middle Eastern name. And I think that's sort of sad, I would argue. In the end, the judge decided he could use the name that he's gone by for years.
But now everybody knows his name is Farouk.
And that's the other sad part, is that Fred should be ashamed or feel, uncomfortable about his birth name so that he should have to fight this thing. I will say this, as a reporter, names and transparency, really super critical. You're an attorney, you understand this. Public documents can get very, very confusing when people start to change their names, and not so confusing that you can't pierce the veil. But as a reporter, you kind of want to go into a record and know who you're looking at. And Fred, apparently on all legal documents, signs his name with his birth name and then runs for office with another name. Modest confusion. But I think at the heart of this, we all know what's really going on, and that's to kind of poke people and say, hey, he's
it's a political
different.
season. Look, I mean, they're going to use any political tactic they can and political edge to throw, a screen over Fred. I mean, he's a great candidate. Has a stellar record. He's an immigrant. It's a low blow, but it's a political season. So I think that that's all we can expect. I'm fully expecting to see mailers that capitalize on this. But I don't think it's appropriate. I think Fred has been here for a long time, accomplished business person. Even his check had his real name with Fred in quotes because that's how he's known. And I think that it was fair for Fred to fight back.
Since you mentioned it, here is that check, and this is part of the backstory of this whole thing. That the lawyer, a rather obscure citizen, files the complaint, but his lawyer who's representing him on it happens to be the brother of a council member who's somewhat at odds. It's strange. We won't get into the strange politics of Newport Beach, but suffice to say, it's the brother of a council member who Fred had written a check for in a prior election. This guy's running for council. Fred wrote him a check for $1,100, and now this guy turns on Fred and says, look, when he wrote me the check, he called himself Farouk Fred Ameri, except if you look where he signed his name, he signed it Fred Ameri. And the truth is, everybody knows him as Fred.
Everybody knows him as Fred.
Now, maybe a little bit to your point, well, maybe rather than get outraged, although I can understand why Fred got outraged, maybe he should have just joked about it and made his opponent, Will O'Neill, call himself William. Instead of.
I think names are really interesting in politics because we've got Loretta Sanchez, who, of course, for a few years was not Loretta Sanchez, but Loretta Brixey. Jerry Brown is not really Jerry on the ballot. He's Gerald, I think, right? Edmund. Thank you. Edmund G.
Why
Brown.
does he do that?
Abraham Lincoln, not well known, was Annie Leibovitz. Really a shocking thing that I found out.
So what do you think? Do you think this is just a regrettable thing?
No, I mean, I think your point is absolutely correct. It's just a low blow political season. It's clearly race baiting. I don't know his religious background, but they're trying to make him be the Muslim candidate, and they think that's going to cost him votes.
Or at least the immigrant, the immigrant.
Right. I mean, Anaheim went through the same thing recently, a week or two ago with Lucille Kring. Now Anaheim has these district elections, and she filed paperwork challenging the Hispanic candidate that's running in her district, because he also used, he didn't use his birth name, but he used the name that he adopted when he immigrated here 20 years ago. And she also made a comment saying that he's a deflocked Catholic priest, which is not true. And she ended up having to drop a lot of those charges. But she's trying to clearly tell the Hispanic community that he's not in good standing with the Catholic Church, which is that's a low blow. And that.
I mean, we see these name designate, what's your title, what's your profession. I mean, this is all going to continue to happen. It'll be a fun election season to see what happens.
Same as it ever was.
Exactly.
Anyways, folks, thanks so much. Great discussions. That's it for now. Thanks again to my guests, Ashleigh Aitken, Clare Venegas, and the always lovely Will Swaim. You can watch this show and past shows by going to pbssocal.org or rickreiff.com. You can also catch our shows and our post-show open mic chatter on YouTube. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University, with its Center for Science and Technology, under construction in Orange, California, is a proud sponsor of Inside OC.